I can't think of anything more devastating to face than the loss of a loved one. Shirley Theiessen and her husband, Carrie, have had to do just that. They've had to face the loss of a child. They've had to learn what it is to grieve through that process. Well, Shirley joins me in the city of Calgary to share her story, The Day I Lost My Son. Shirley, welcome to 100 Nutley Street.
Thank you.
Shirley, God has blessed both you and your husband, Carrie, with two beautiful children. But then, in his infinite wisdom, he decided to take one of your children to be home with him. Tell us your story.
Well, from the moment that we knew we were expecting each of our children, we began praying fervently that God would bless them and protect them. And we have a son, Jordan, and a daughter, Chantal. And our son, growing up, he rarely got sick, but when he did, it was always something very rare, unknown that perplexed the doctors. And so on two occasions particularly, he became very ill, and prolonged hospital stays in intensive care and isolation. And we prayed for God to heal him and protect him.
This is when he was a young boy.
Well, one was as an infant, one as a 14-year-old.
Okay.
And so we were so thankful that God healed him and protected him. And later, 2012, Jordan actually graduated from university, from Trinity Western, and he found a job in our city in Calgary. And Carrie and I were just so delighted that he would be living close by. And later that same year, October 6, 2012, Jordan and his wife, they got married here in Calgary. This couple had everything going for them and a promising future ahead. And they chose to delay their official honeymoon to Hawaii until November. Well, that honeymoon never came to be. Jordan died in a workplace accident just 12 days after the wedding. And our life was devastated. We were wondering, where was God in protecting him?
Now, when you talk about God's protection, let me just sidestep for a moment here. How did you and your husband Carrie feel? I mean, I've listened to you a couple of times talk about moments when, you wanted to rant and rave. I mean, you're angry.
Yes.
Bitter.
Yes.
Those feelings.
Well, grief has a tendency to bring out the worst in us, and there's nothing like pain and suffering to reveal sort of the character underneath. And what I realized is that although I had had a 45-year relationship with Jesus, really I was thrown into a crisis of faith.
Yeah.
And there was that anger and there was that despair. And it was very difficult, but I pretty soon figured out I had a spirit of entitlement. I was feeling like, God, I have been serving you for all this time. Maybe not perfectly, certainly not perfectly, but consistently, and certainly better than Mrs. So-and-so over there who still has all her children safe and sound. And I soon came to realize that bitterness had an opportunity to spring up in my heart faster than a dandelion on a summer day. And it started to scare me. Tim Keller has a quote that is very convicting to me. He says, worry is believing that God will get it, he won't get it right. Worry is believing that God won't get it right. And bitterness is believing that God got it wrong. And I certainly wasn't shy about telling God that he got this wrong. How could he? Jordan was following hard after him. Doesn't our country desperately need godly young adults to be role models for the next generation?
And that kind of ties in with your, God, where were you to protect my son? Someone wisely said, and I totally agree, that Shirley has become an expert on something nobody wants to learn, and that's grief. Where did your journey of grieving take you?
Grief can feel very isolating. And yet I needed people to be praying for me, people to be surrounding me. Well, one thing I had done prior, when Jordan was in kindergarten, I started a Thanksgiving journal. And it was a delightful discipline. And, but when Jordan died, I stopped. I felt like my life had ended and I had no reason to be thankful.
Okay.
And that went on probably for the first year. And so a year after, into my grief, I took my Thanksgiving journal and I made it a practice to sit there and just jot down one thing, just one thing I could be thankful for every day. And it felt hypocritical because my heart wasn't into it.
Right.
But I really, I recognized that bitterness and thanksgiving cannot coexist in my heart and my mind. And so what I sensed God was doing, he was reordering or rewiring my brain.
Right.
And he was honoring that thanksgiving of praise.
Right. Because you believe prayer was a very important part in leading you through this process.
Oh, absolutely. And there were many weeks and months where all I could cry out was Jesus. But that's enough. And I also had people praying for me. I knew that.
That time and that process has led you into a ministry today where God is using you on multiple levels. Can you just explain some of those to us?
Well, before my son died, I was one of those people who was terribly inept at coming alongside my grieving friends and offering encouragement. I would often lean into ill-timed Bible verses or cliches, or sometimes I even chose avoidance because I didn't want to make them cry.
Right.
And now I realize how wrong that is. And so as a result of my friends being incredibly effective grief companions in my life, I've realized that we need the help and support of others in our life. God made us social beings. Grief looks different for every person. And believe it or not, I used to think grief was best dealt all alone. It's a private matter. I'm not sure how I could have been so wrong. And so as a result of seeing how impactful it was to have grieving friends come around me, and recognizing that there's many people like the younger me who feel so insecure and ill-equipped to come alongside their grieving friends, I have begun Corner Bend Consulting, which its whole purpose is to equip people to journey effectively with their grieving friends.
You know, we just have about a minute left, and to tie in with what you were saying, Paul said in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 that believers should not grieve as those who have no hope. He's not telling us not to grieve, but in the grieving process, there's hope. How have you found that to be true for Shirley?
Well, hope has a name, and his name is Jesus Christ. And he is the pivotal point of my whole grief journey. And so believing that he is my hope, he's actually encouraged me to look at my pain and suffering through his eyes and ask him for redemptive purposes in my pain. And some friends gave me this sign that says, be the kind of woman that when your feet hit the floor each morning, the devil says, oh crap, she's up. And I realized that's become my marching orders. God gives me hope. And my enemy would love to keep me in the posture of despair. But my greatest strategy is worship warfare. And so I've been just praying and asking God, leverage my grief for your glory. I need to see your redemptive threads in my story. And so he has remarkably shown me opportunities to elevate his name through my grief. And it has been quite an adventure.
Shirley, thank you so much for sharing your story. And let me just say, those that are watching right now, maybe you're at a process point. Maybe you're just starting. Maybe you're near the end, but there's this grievance within your own heart about something that's taken place. Could be the loss of a child. Let me encourage you. We have prayer partners who would love to connect and pray with you. The number is 1-866-273-4444. Pick up your phone and give them a call.